The Bogosity Podcast, early and ad-free. Become a subscriber at Patreon, Subscribestar, or Discord. Use the links at donate.bogosity.tv.
Welcome to the year-end wrap-up for the Bogosity Podcast for the year 2024, the year of the vintage spaceship. This is your host, Shane Killian. Let's look at a summary of the stories we covered in 2024, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And what a year it was, especially for generative AI, which saw tons of improvements all over the place, but also had a lot of catastrophic fails, like Google's Gemini, which continued its downward streak, giving wrong and even libelous information about journalists, including Matt Taibbi and Brian Lunduke. It looks like there may be more than one lawsuit over that. Speaking of the AI lawsuits, the case of Coussart v. OpenAI was just a comedy of errors. In the ruling granting the motion to dismiss, Judge Vincent Chabria said, "Here, the complaint is not only excessive in length, but also contains swaths of unnecessary and distracting allegations, making it nearly impossible to determine the adequacy of the plaintiff's legal claims. Plaintiffs need to understand that they are in a court of law, not a town hall meeting. Because the court has no way of telling whether the plaintiffs could adequately state a claim once all the mud is scraped off the walls of the complaint, dismissal is with leave to amend. But if the amended complaint continues to focus on general policy concerns and irrelevant information in a way that interferes with a clear presentation of the legal claims at issue, it will be dismissed with prejudice. Moreover, if the plaintiffs manage to state a claim that gets past the pleading stage, they should know that, given the way the current version of the complaint was drafted, it's unlikely that they or their counsel can be trusted to adequately and responsibly represent the interests of absent class members in a federal lawsuit. They weren't able to do so, so the judge ended it. It was a similar situation at both the Getty Images case and the Claude AI case, where we saw complaints full of hyperbole, histrionics, and marketing hype. And they never actually got around to saying why AI was copyright infringement. They didn't pound the facts, they didn't pound the law, they pounded the table. It remains to be seen what the judges will do in these cases. And then there are the almost identical cases filed by the RIAA against Suno and Udio, so much so that they both hired the same law firm to defend themselves. In both cases, the defense is very simple. You cannot copyright a style. And that's another theme we see through these AI cases. The big content makers want not just their expression to be copyrighted, but their styles as well. If they're successful, it would have so many effects far beyond AI that it would be the worst thing to happen to human creativity in all of history. There's more to talk about in AI, but it'll wait until we cover the BBE and IE winners. In other court shenanigans, we had the aftermath of the Alex Jones trial, where they illegally tried to award the assets of InfoWars to The Onion to turn it into a parody site, ignoring a higher bidder who offered twice as much. And we covered a few cases where the precedent we warned you about is being applied. There were the usual cops behaving badly stories, including dog sniffing and doing terrible things while being protected by qualified immunity. By some estimates, over 1,200 people were unjustly murdered by police in 2024. The news around Elon Musk and his companies could probably cover an entire edition all on its own. Let's begin with the bogus lawsuit where two people who bought less than 10 shares between them sued Musk on behalf of Tesla shareholders, yeah, right, to cancel his $56 billion compensation package. Judge Kathleen McCormick, very much in the Biden-controlled Delaware justice system, made probably the most corrupt decision of her career to side with the plaintiffs, which got her biggest bogon emitter. Apparently, they don't like it when CEO pay is tied to company performance. In response, Tesla shareholders overwhelmingly voted to reinstate the package and to reincorporate Tesla from Delaware to Texas. But the judge then said, "Don't care, he still doesn't get it." The Biden administration continued their persecution of Tesla with another bogus recall because the font size on their warning lights was 3% too small. They made them change, for example, the internationally recognized symbol for park into the word park, which might be a problem for people for whom English isn't their first language. By the way, several other cars had this same problem, but NHTSA said they didn't have to fix it. The news media made it sound like a big recall of 2.2 million cars when it was really just an over-the-air software update. And I easily found more recalls of much more serious problems over the last couple of years, such as Ford F-150s recalled for parking brake malfunction, other Ford and Lincoln cars where the doors could open while driving, and a fire risk of Ford and Lincoln cars, well over 1 million all total, and even worse, 3.3 million Kia and Hyundai vehicles that could spontaneously catch fire even when they're parked and turned off. Yet, barely a blip in the news about those. In fact, according to NHTSA, Chrysler had the most recalls in 2024, followed by Ford with 63. 11 car makers all total had more recalls than Tesla, including GM, BMW, Volkswagen, Honda, Toyota, and others. And I guarantee you, they weren't over-the-air software updates. Seriously, can we stop calling those recalls? Unless you want to say Microsoft recalls Windows every month. Which, now that I say it out loud, they probably should. By the way, probably a good idea to go to your car manufacturer's website and put in your VIN to check if there are any recalls on your car. That might be a good thing to do every year. Tesla's full self-driving has taken social media by storm with the Thanksgiving weekend release of version 13, which by all accounts is working better than it ever has, including parking, starting from parking spots and garages, reversing, and even three-point turns. It's still supervised though, so Tesla owners with FSD are still having to pay attention and take over whenever FSD does something it shouldn't. But FSD owners are reporting that those events are more and more rare, and when they do happen, it's less and less of a safety issue. Many report robo-taxi-like experiences where they make entire drives start to finish without touching the steering wheel or pedals. But of course, we've got the usual tactic of blaming every crash on FSD when, as in past years, Tesla releases information showing FSD wasn't on, or in some cases wasn't even downloaded. At the same time, sales of EVs from other companies were dwindling. Ford in particular pulled back on its sales, and listeners to this podcast know why. Dealers aren't pushing EVs because they can't make money doing oil changes, which are very lucrative for them. So they push customers interested in EVs over to hybrids. But Tesla, as we covered years back, managed to fight for the right to sell their cars outside of the dealership system. It also seems like a lot of state governments seem to be pushing back on EVs because, guess what? EV owners don't pay gas tax. Of course, they pay the excise tax on electricity when they charge their cars, but don't pester me with facts. The last thing we have to look at this year, Elon-wise, is SpaceX. And I mean, how can you not love Starship, especially with the first stage not only being reusable, but caught by the very platform it lifted off from? And then there's Starlink, which was a godsend to people in Georgia, North Carolina, and other places that were hit hard by Hurricane Helene. SpaceX gave access to people in affected areas for free, and volunteers distributed the hardware for it. FEMA didn't, but that's a whole other story. So, looking at good news in the law, there's a good indication that the North Carolina Supreme Court will consider knocking down the horrible statement of need laws preventing clinics from competing with hospitals or new hospitals being built. An ophthalmologist in New Bern is saying he can perform cataract surgery in his office for $1,600 if they only let him. Currently, it costs $6,000 doing it at the hospital. It'll certainly be one to watch out for. There was a big cybersecurity failure that we've been predicting for years. All of the identifying data associated with Know Your Customer rules had a massive breach of 2.7 billion records, including, potentially, the social security number of every single American. And then after that, there was a big cyber attack on the text messaging system by China, one of the biggest intelligence compromises in U.S. history, which clearly shows that strong encryption is absolutely necessary. The FBI even admitted that, and then immediately walked it back. They went back to the old, "But we need to break encryption," ignoring what every single expert has told them. Break it for them, and you also break it for Russia, China, and everyone else too. And in fact, we covered how NIST may be doing that again with the post-quantum algorithms submitted by the NSA, ignoring ones that were more flexible and more secure. Last time that happened, it was discovered that the NSA had slipped in a back door. We had some good news for our gun rights, including the amazing ruling from a federal judge who said that illegal immigrants have Second Amendment rights. Another said that the Second Amendment applies to machine guns. The Supreme Court sided with the NRA in their civil case against New York for violating their First Amendment rights, and Thomas Massie, who has easily become my favorite congressman, introduced the National Constitutional Carry Act. As usual, it was stuck in a committee and never heard from again, which is another way Massie is like today's Ron Paul. Hopefully the next Congress can do something about it. Okay, moving to the Supreme Court. The Chevron doctrine is dead. I almost gave them the silver Cluon for that. So now, the administrative state doesn't get to run its own court since it's the executive branch, not judicial. That's a massive win. Unfortunately, they immediately followed it up with a brutal ruling in the case against the Sacklers and Purdue Pharma over the bogus claim that OxyContin resulted in addiction and death when it doesn't. Deaths from illicit drugs were misattributed to it. So now it's open season for the ambulance chasers. Pain patients never even got a mention. Shortly after that, we saw a study from the University of Bristol which tried to make out like any sort of aberrant behavior was indicative of drug abuse, which would include simple things like putting pills in a weekly planner. It was a textbook example of Morton's fork, when completely contradictory behaviors, taking your pills too often, not taking them often enough, using a pill planner, not using a pill planner, knowing too much about your condition, not knowing enough about your condition, and so on, were all seen as opioid use disorder. And yet, as broadly as they made it, they could still only get that up to 10% of pain patients. I'll try to make the 2024 election coverage quick. Most of it you already know, so I'll just hit the highlights. Early on, we saw the Georgia court cases over the Dominion voting machines, where their expert, Alex Halderman, compromised a machine live in court using only a ballpoint pen. Later on, the Georgia Election Board reprimanded Fulton County for scanning errors in the 2020 recount, but it still wouldn't have affected the results, so keep your mouth shut. It even came out that the Dominion master encryption keys had been exposed because Fulton County posted them to the web-accessible spreadsheet in plain text. And that wasn't even close to the problems we saw with DEF CON's Voting Village, which found numerous vulnerabilities in voting systems, as they always do, but which wasn't allowed to be on the main floor due to political pressure and even death threats. We even saw people's voter registrations being illegally canceled in Georgia's new voter registration portal. We know it for a fact because two of them were Marjorie Taylor Greene and Brad Raffensperger. And since the election, we've seen a big switcheroo. After Democrats screeched for 4 years, that Trump and others disputing the results of the 2020 election was treason and insurrection and all sorts of mean, nasty, ugly things, they're going way conspiratard crazy in claiming that the election was stolen by Elon Musk using his Starlink satellites. There's actually a serious movement among Democrats to stop the certification of the votes on January 6 and stop Trump from being president. I wish I could make up crap like that. We'll have to see what the new Congress does when they convene.
Sometimes you just have to stomp some skulls. From the mind of Mr. Dapperton, a game for the ages. In a world where a race of undead furries tries to take over the world's nuclear arsenal, one man must stop them. But which man? You choose. Dapperton. Elon.
Not my Dogecoins.
Joe.
Build me back.
Shapiro.
My kippa's ruined.
Or Don John.
Ow, my ear.
Forget those losers. You know you want to play as me, Lord Killian. That's right. You can stomp the skulls of those commie furries and save the universe as me.
7 complete different worlds with more coming all the time. Full controller support. You can even get eaten by a worm and pooped out into a furry cathedral. You know you want this game. Go to links.bogosity.tv/skullstompers and play Skull Stompers now.
Alright, let's go over the more notable recipients of Biggest Bogon Emitter and Idiot Extraordinaire over 2024. And one of the most important that a lot more people should be aware of is Capitol Police Officer Harry Dunn, who lied under oath to the Jan 6 committee and in the Oath Keepers trial, which was crucial to gaining their convictions. We learned about this because of the extensive video releases from the day that refuted every single one of his claims. Hopefully, with the new administration, all of the video will be released and we'll finally have a complete picture of what happened on that day. The ATF got one because they stopped a gun purchase saying that the buyer smelled of marijuana. And then there was the time Chechnya got it for banning music that was too fast or too slow. Catherine Marr got it for saying she abandoned a free and open internet as the mission of Wikipedia because that was a, quote, white male westernized construct. A huge one was CrowdStrike, whose massive security failures in their Falcon software caused the almost simultaneous BSODs of Windows machines all over the world, and it resulted in a boot loop that required a physical visit to the machine to fix, which sucked if you were far away from your data center or were in charge of a corporate network with 400 machines that needed fixing. Dan O'Dowd got one for having his ass handed to him in a debate on X with Tesla owners over his lies about Tesla's full self-driving and his hate-mongering of Linux. He didn't just get another idiot extraordinaire, he caused us to coin the phrase stultus ipse loquitur. The idiot speaks for himself. David Evan Harris got one for trying to single out open source AI as dangerous. The Kadri and Silverman plaintiffs got one for their motion in their suit against Meta when they had to be smacked down by Judge Thomas Hickson for repeated, months-long violations of discovery. Florida and Alabama each got one for legislation to ban lab-grown meat. California got one for their First Amendment-hating AI Transparency Act, which would basically make it illegal to make AI parodies of politicians. Gavin Newsom signed it into law after an AI parody of Kamala Harris went viral. Fortunately, it was stopped by a preliminary injunction. California got a second one for giving their failed bullet train another $100 billion. And then there are all the states that had to be sued by the Free Speech Coalition for infringing on the First Amendment by requiring visitors to adult websites to provide government IDs. Despite everything positive we've had to say about AI, we did have to give an IE to Stability AI for their disastrous release of the much-awaited Stable Diffusion 3.0. So much about the technology was state-of-the-art, but unfortunately, they became so puritanical, trying to censor the model to not make nudity, that it failed at completely innocuous prompts like woman lying on grass. And their new terms and conditions basically made it impossible for studios and artists to actually use it. They did try to fix things later in the year by releasing 3.5, which was much better, but shortly before that, Flux came out and stole whatever thunder it might have gotten, making beautiful photo quality images and even doing a pretty good job with text. Timing is everything. Germany is getting pushed back over its nuclear phase out, including how the German Economy Ministry, under the leadership of the Green Party, lied about the phase out by willfully excising expert advice that supported the continued functioning of German nuclear power plants. The experts gave 3 scenarios for keeping the plants running completely safely, which were deleted and replaced with language saying that it just couldn't be done safely. And now Sweden is pissed at them because Germany is making so little power for themselves that Sweden, under EU rules, is being made to cover for them, massively raising the price of electricity for them. Speaking of the EU, they got BBE for their idiotic renewable hydrogen plan. It was a massive failure for numerous reasons, not the least of which is that electrolysis is a terrible way to make hydrogen. What's a better way to make hydrogen? Nuclear power. Things are really looking up on that front, by the way. Microsoft, as we covered, wants to restart 3 Mile Island's Unit 1, the one that wasn't hit by the disaster that was TMI-2. That's a massive customer to sell power to for their data centers and AI generation. X-Energy's Generation 4 Pebble-Bed reactor will be built in Texas and partially funded by Dow Chemical, who pledged $500 million to have it built right next to their plant, hopefully to go critical in 2030. And TerraPower's Natrium reactor is going ahead in Wyoming after Amazon pledged $500 million so they can use electricity for their AWS data centers and cloud services. The first reactor, Kemmerer 1, could be operational in 2029. But with delays, realistically you can expect both of these to take at least until 2032, if the NRC doesn't kill it arbitrarily like they have all the others. Remember that the NRC has never approved a single first-of-its-kind reactor in its entire 50-year existence. Although with Trump appointing an executive of a nuclear startup to the Department of Energy, things might change on that front. As for the EU, they just showed a microcosm of everything that's wrong with their regulatory structure when the European Commission posted to X, "It's time for the charger. Today, the USB-C becomes officially the common standard for charging electronic devices in the EU. It means better charging technology, reduced e-waste, and less fuss to find the chargers you need." Wow. Only took them 10 years. This is why you shouldn't leave these standards to government regulation. What happens when the next generation of USB comes out? How long will Europeans be stuck with the then obsolete USB-C? Now, this explains why their EV chargers are still those clunky, slow CCD chargers, while the US has moved on to NACS. Maybe in 10 years. By the way, there still isn't one standard for electrical power outlets in Europe. Okay, let's look at the news media, which got, at my count, 13. I'm not entirely sure I didn't miscount, but it's in the double digits for sure. The biggest one probably being the aforementioned conspiracy theory that Elon Musk used Starlink to steal the election. The New York Times took it for outright lies about Starlink in Brazil, claiming it got an Amazon tribe addicted to porn. They took it again for their cease and desist against Perplexity AI. Newsweek, Midas Touch, and many others got it for a false claim that Trump waved to nobody when he got out of his plane, even though they admitted that there were people present. They showed a picture of him waving at a camera and said he was waving to nobody, not realizing that he was waving at the photographer. And there was a third case where he was waving to the guy holding open the door of his SUV. Apparently, none of them, or their commenters, could grasp the idea that he just might be waving to the help. NPR had to issue a major correction after publishing a hit piece on journalist Rich Lowry, accusing him of using a racial slur on the Megyn Kelly show when he didn't. Whereas they dismissed all of the videos of Biden being mentally absent as cheap fakes, saying that, oh yes, Biden was just sharp as a tack, thank you very much, up until his debate with Trump where they just couldn't deny it anymore. Newsweek got another one, along with FBI Director Christopher Wray, who got 2, for saying that Trump might not have been hit with a bullet at the famous assassination attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania, even though he very clearly was. The Boston Globe got it for claiming that Kamala Harris's proposed policy on so-called price gouging is good economics. Speaking of Kamala, remember when the news media tried to deny that she ever was the border czar? And the long collective memory of the internet reminded them of it in their own words in clip after clip after clip. And they pretty much all got it when they outright lied and said that a DOJ report found that there were no government agents in the crowd on J6, when in fact the report found there were 26 of them. Oh, and what about the bloodbath hoax? You remember when Trump warned that if Democrats won in 2024, the U.S. automobile industry would experience a bloodbath at the U.S.-Mexico border because of all the Mexican-made cars? And yet, the media jumped all over it, saying that Trump threatened violence, another insurrection, saying there'd be a bloodbath if he didn't win. Then there's the whole Project 2025 red herring, a document from the Heritage Foundation which had nothing to do with Trump, which they made into the bogeyman for this race. And even at that, they had to make up most of what it supposedly said. Little wonder that many hosts, including Anderson Cooper, Wolf Blitzer, and others, have seen their jobs threatened. Meanwhile, MSNBC continues to be the cesspool collecting failed federal bureaucrats. And since the last episode, I'll have to give them one more for spreading around a story that Congress can block Trump from taking office, even though last time they called it an insurrection, impeached Trump over it, and passed a law saying that Congress just rubber stamps the result and has no power to investigate it. The idea is, once again, insurrection, The Hill reported. The evidence of Donald Trump's engaging in such insurrection is overwhelming. The matter has been decided in 3 separate forums, 2 of which were fully contested with the active participation of Trump's counsel. Yeah, but not anywhere that actually mattered. He's never been charged criminally with it, and his impeachment trial resulted in acquittal. Here's how they talk around that, quote, "At the trial in the Senate, 7 Republicans joined all Democrats to provide a majority for conviction, but failed to reach the 2/3 vote required for removal from office. They're acting like just a majority is necessary for conviction. Not so. Article 1, Section 3, Clause 6 reads, "The Senate shall have the sole power to try all impeachments. When sitting for that purpose, they shall be on oath or affirmation. When the President of the United States is tried, the Chief Justice shall preside. And no person shall be convicted without the concurrence of 2/3 of the members present." I mean, that's just like in a criminal trial, if they had a hung jury where 7 wanted to convict, they'd say, a majority for conviction. No, it doesn't work that way. Just listen to how argumentative this is. Quote, "A vote for a candidate disqualified by the Constitution is plainly in accordance with the normal use of words not regularly given. Disqualification for engaging in insurrection is no different from disqualification based on other constitutional requirements such as age, citizenship from birth, and 14 years residency in the United States. We covered at length why that's bogus. And remember, when Trump's people just wanted an investigation, they hit the ceiling and said that it was insurrection and even a RICO violation. Now they're calling for invalidating entire states. Michigan, Arizona, Georgia, all indicted people for doing far less, just for talking about investigating it. Moving on, we gave it to the Second Circuit for the Internet Archive case, where they ruled against the archive refusing to recognize the one-to-one own-to-loan aspect of their lending library, which is exactly how regular libraries work. The IA bought a physical copy of the book and then loaned out only one book for each physical copy. They just loaned it out digitally using the exact same DRM protections that the publishers use. If this passes muster with the Supreme Court, it could potentially be used to take down every library in the country, which, as we've pointed out several times, is what publishers actually want. They've never liked libraries. We gave one to Apple for kicking the Musi app out of their iPhone store due to a YouTube lie, specifically that Musi violated YouTube's TOS regarding the use of YouTube's non-public interface, which the app doesn't do. There was actually a pretty major one for the Godot Foundation, which makes the open source gaming engine that competes with Unity and Unreal. They engaged in a mass banning of their users, including developers and game designers, based solely on political opinions that were slightly to the right of Stalin, citing harassment that absolutely did not happen. That included a cleansing of users on their Discord as well as their GitHub accounts, meaning that these users and their projects couldn't even get security updates. Well, as with all open source, if you don't like what they're doing, you can fork off. And that's what happened. Redo Engine is now a major fork of Godot, with 4.3 as the latest release, continuing to get upstream updates from Godot, as well as some pretty nice features of their own. The J6 committee got it for deleting terabytes of evidence that they were supposed to turn over to the committee. Meanwhile, we still have no good information about the pipe bomb, other than it was a lie that there was one left at GOP HQ. And then there were the revelations that Liz Cheney broke the law and attorney-client protections by speaking with Cassidy Hutchinson through an intermediary without her lawyer's knowledge to get her to change her testimony and make up that stupid clavicle story. Representative Hank Johnson and law professor Stephen Gillers tried to make Justice Clarence Thomas recuse himself from all Trump cases. Johnson is the same guy who said Guam would capsize if more people moved to the island, so there you are. And then there were the ones who wanted to try and get Justice Alito to recuse himself because his wife flew a pine tree flag, something that documents show they themselves didn't even believe. Congress got it for a bipartisan tax hike. Marco Rubio got his for fear-mongering about Chinese batteries in a direct attack on Tesla. AOC got one for justifying violence, specifically the murder of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. Alex Proyas, director of iRobot, got one for claiming that Tesla ripped off the design of Optimus, Cybercab, and Robovan from his movie, which the online meme makers made hay with. The Connecticut Attorney General's office got it for their state attorneys claiming that hunting rifles aren't protected by the Second Amendment. We gave it to Lucas Kuntz after a campaign event where he was bragging about how good he was with guns. He and Adam Kinzinger set up metal targets 20 feet away, shot them with high-caliber rifles with scopes, whereupon the bullets fragmented and wounded a reporter in the shoulder. And then he bragged about it on X! Kamala Harris got one for her staged campaign stop in which regulars were cleared out of a Pittsburgh restaurant so she could fill it with her supporters, which she then pretended to meet and greet on video. Tim Walz got his first one for his terrible performance in the VP debate against J.D. Vance, in particular when he claimed that misinformation isn't protected by the First Amendment, contrary to numerous Supreme Court precedents. He even repeated the old fire in a crowded theater fallacy. You know, the one they used to prosecute draft protesters? And then there were 10 all total for Joe Biden and his administration, starting with the continued prosecution and persecution of journalist Steve Baker for daring to get the truth about J6 to us. The second was for his corporate tax hike, which helped push up prices for Americans. He also lied about Trump calling for a unified Reich, which he never did. And Biden just continued over and over again to bleed out his supposedly wonderful jobs record when the BLS had to revise the figures down by 810,000, the second worst revision in U.S. history. It also went to the CDC and the FBI for hiding the data on how often good guys with guns stop shootings. Biden, Harris, and their supporters threw an absolute hissy fit when the Teamsters Union refused to endorse anyone for president. They were wanting the endorsement for Harris, this being after Biden was ousted and Harris installed as a nominee without a single vote, But the union members voted in a straw poll favoring Trump by 9 points over Harris. Another example of how out of touch unions are with their members. Biden's FDA got it for the Costco butter recall because their Kirkland Signature Unsalted Sweet Cream Butter didn't have a warning on it that says it contains milk. He didn't actually get one for pardoning his son Hunter after promising not to, but we did give one to Dan Goldman for all of the retconning and gaslighting he did to try and justify it. Another one his administration would have deserved it for is FEMA's response to Hurricane Helene, which, as we've seen many times over, ended up curtailing volunteer efforts to help people and get supplies in, while claiming otherwise and taking credit for things they didn't do and even obstructed others from doing. Unless, of course, you're in a nice urban democratic area like Asheville or Boone. The Secret Service got it by saying that just having a phone with apps on it means you agreed to be tracked without a warrant. I could spend way too long covering the censorship industrial complex that's been operating under his administration, with ostensibly private ad coalitions like GARM ending up being fronts for DHS and CISA. Given how much Media Matters has been resisting discovery in Elon Musk's case against them, with them really not wanting to turn over their donors and supporters, one has to wonder about them too. But we know it's gone all through social media, including Facebook, YouTube, and many others. Except TikTok, so little wonder they want to ban it. We'll have to see next year if that goes through, because there's no way that passes muster with the First Amendment. Since the last edition, Biden has also granted clemency to the judge behind the Kids for Cash scandal, convicted in 2011 of putting juveniles in for-profit detention centers in exchange for over $2 million in kickbacks. The scandal forced Pennsylvania to vacate thousands of juvenile convictions. And then there's his commutation of 37 death row inmates, reducing their death sentences to life in prison. It's not so much who he granted them to, but who he didn't. 3 still remain. If you're going to take a principled stand against the death penalty, you need to commute all of them. Those with commuted sentences include a man who murdered 12 people, 2 co-defendants who murdered 2 children, and a man who kidnapped and killed a 12-year-old girl. So that's the standard. The 3 who didn't get it? The Tree of Life synagogue shooter, Dylan Roof, the Charleston church shooter, and the man who carried out the Boston Marathon bombing. Yeah, tell me none of this is political. Geez, you don't even make it past the first sentence of Biden's statement. Quote, "I've dedicated my career to reducing violent crime and ensuring a fair and effective justice system." Yeah, right. We covered your insanely racist crime bills in the Senate, as well as your extreme politicization of the Justice Department as president. And, of course, there were tons of them having to do with Donald Trump, starting right off the bat with NBC stoking fears that Trump will use the military against the people like a dictator. Colorado tried to kick him off the ballot for insurrection over J6, something that, again, he was never even charged with in the courts and was acquitted of at his impeachment trial. Trump himself got one for his claim that tariffs grow the economy. Sorry, but they don't. And no, Mexico and China don't pay them. We do. There was the insanity of his civil fraud trial, mostly Judge Arthur Engeron's antics which earned him biggest bogon emitter. That was despite AP's review of nearly 150 reported cases since New York's repeated fraud statute was passed in 1956, which showed that every other time a company was taken from its owner, victims and losses were key factors. Customers had lost money or bought defective products or never received services ordered, leaving them cheated and angry. What's more, businesses were taken over almost always as a last resort to stop a fraud in progress and protect potential victims. They included a phony psychologist who sold dubious treatments, a fake lawyer who sold false claims he could get students into law school, and businessmen who marketed financial advice but instead swindled people out of their home deeds. But in this case, there were no victims, and everyone involved was completely happy with the deal. It was all 100% political and violated both the U.S. and New York constitutions as well as violations of attorney-client privilege and statutes of limitations which Engoron ignored the appeals court over. The fraud trials were overseen by AG Letitia James, who also got one for New York in an unrelated case, her antics against a nuclear power plant she had previously forced to shut down. James violated federal law to stop the plant from releasing diluted tritium water, which has never been linked to cancer in humans, into the Hudson Bay. She and State Senator Pete Harcum fear-mongered about the tritium in the water, even though they had already been told that far more tritium is created in the Hudson Bay every day by the rays of the sun than is released from the power plant. By the way, the nuclear plant had to be replaced by 3 natural gas plants, making it even more difficult for New York to meet their carbon goals. And then, of course, there was the Georgia case prosecuted by Fani Willis, who ended up with 3, not counting the revelation that her investigation into Trump began with an illegal recording that should have been protected under attorney-client privilege. In addition to the Trump trial, she really screwed up the Young Thug trial after illegal ex parte meetings with the previous judge, and the next judge scolding them for trying to communicate ex parte with her as well. She got her 3rd when the court found her to be in violation of the open records request from Judicial Watch. Her office really does not want to turn over records of the meetings we know she had with Kamala Harris and Jack Smith. Speaking of Smith, in the Florida classified documents case, we had more evidence of prosecutorial misconduct, including the prosecution actually planting many of the classified docs to frame Trump. The case was dismissed when it came out that Jack Smith wasn't even appointed to be a federal prosecutor. They have to be appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate, and he never was. So he had no more business being there than some rando off the street, so that case is gone. His D.C. January 6 case is over and done with too, because of immunity, because he's not a real prosecutor, and because Trump was reelected, so the whole point of the trial, which absolutely was to affect the election, despite all their protestations to the contrary, was now moot. And in the New York hush money trial, Alvin Bragg got 2. We got the first inkling that Judge Juan Merchan wasn't on the level when it turns out his daughter had a job raising $90 million using that very same Trump trial, using it to fundraise for Biden, Adam Schiff, and other Democrats. Even liberal law scholars were warning that the case was rigged from the word go. We had yet more perjury from Michael Cohen, the prosecution's star witness. Bragg got another one when it came out that his office destroyed evidence by deleting 3 pages of phone calls between Cohen and Stormy Daniels' lawyer. And yes, Trump was found guilty, but the question is, of what crime? As we covered, the judge told the jury that they could just pick their own crime, and they didn't even have to agree among themselves. How are you supposed to defend yourself in that situation? We do have a couple of potential pieces of good news with Trump. Aside from his promise to pardon Ross Ulbricht, we also have his promise of changes to the cryptocurrency industry. After Elizabeth Warren and the Biden SEC continue their assault on crypto, including lying to Tornado Cash users and arresting Roger Ver for selling Bitcoin at a time when he was no longer a U.S. citizen, Trump promised to rein it all in and let people use crypto for payments. We'll see if he keeps either promise. We also had a couple of very unlikely Silver Cluon Award winners. The first was Adam Conover of Adam Ruins Everything, who responded to the show being taken off yet another streaming service by saying that if all else fails, you can always watch it with BitTorrent. The other was Mark Zuckerberg for making a very good case as to why AI should be open source. Are you listening, Elon Musk? Yeah, there were only 2 this year. Is it just getting worse? Or am I getting more cynical in my old age? Keep an eye out, everyone, and let me know if you spot a worthy recipient in 2025. If you're on the Wi-Fi in a coffee shop or hotel, anyone on that network can get your traffic. Do you really trust all of those strangers? For that matter, do you really trust your ISP? A VPN can protect you from prying eyes, disguise your location, and even foil government censors. It's essential in this day and age, so go to vpn.bogosity.tv and you'll be taken to BoxPN. Starting at just $2.99 a month, you can get unlimited high-speed connections to VPN servers all over the world, and they don't log connections, so your privacy is assured. Traveling abroad, just VPN home, and don't worry about what those other governments are doing. Back at home, stop your ISP from traffic shaping and messing with the quality internet access you're paying good money for. You can connect from multiple machines at once, including your smartphone or tablet, and it supports all the secure standards, including OpenVPN and SSTP. Bypass censors and surveillance with your own secure VPN connection. Go to vpn.bogosity.tv. Alright, it's finally time to go through all the nominees and name 2024's Idiot of the Year. Let's get a couple others that people nominated that we haven't had a chance to talk about, starting with P on the Bogosity Discord, who nominated RFK Jr., quote, for popularizing long-debunked things like him waging war on fluoride. We also covered his anti-vaccination policy on the November 10 edition, and I also made a couple videos about him on my channel about his claims about seed oils, and also about how, despite the claims of many people, he's not a libertarian. Chris Hangartner nominated the Democratic Party, quote, mainly the whole thing about using Kamala Harris, even though she was extremely unpopular in their own party. Yes, as mentioned earlier, she never got a single vote for her nomination. And yet, after Joe Biden was basically forced out after his disastrous performance in the debate, and it became clear he couldn't win, instead of having proper caucuses to find a replacement, the establishment, most likely led in the background by Barack Obama, basically forced the party to accept Kamala. Even though it was clear to many people that she'd have a very difficult road beating Trump. And yet, they were able to delude so many of their unthinking flock of her oh-so-certain victory that the crank conspiracy theories about Elon Musk stealing the election for Trump have risen up into elected Congress members. They could and should have taken the time to properly caucus their party to find a proper candidate. If they'd done that, they might have had a chance. This definitely means they deserve this. Were it not for the next one. Really, I was going to give it to the news media after just the incredibly stupid things they've done this year, basically as a collective, where they get something from a common source and just parrot it, like the bloodbath thing. But really, the news media is a lot of different people, and when you have an individual doing so much bogosity and so much damage, they can easily surpass all of that. And as Shadowfoil pointed out on the Discord, despite not featuring him on the podcast, on my YouTube channel, I just had to do too many debunkings of Robert Reich in the last 12 months. He's right. 4 out of the 21 debunkings I've done of him all total over the last 7 years were in 2024. That's almost a fifth of them. The executioner backed him up, quote, Robert Reich, the proprietor of such classics as Diaper Prices Are Too Damn High, Henry Ford tried making customers of his workers, so raised the minimum wage, and, who could forget, arrest Elon Musk and break up his company. In Robert Reich's Shrinking Brain, I debunked his claim that inflation is the result of corporate greed and not political greed. He even tried calling it greedflation. Congress and the president, of course, are never greedy, at least when they're Democratic. As I pointed out, as a former Secretary of Labor, he knows that everything he said is a lie. In Reich Tarded, he lied again about inflation, using long-debunked talking points, including reduced competition, which is debunked by Census Bureau data, blaming airfares on airline mergers and not heavy regulations, pharmaceutical prices, even though they're heavily regulated as well, food prices regulated by the USDA, and so on. All the while producing no examples from the free market, including booming open source innovation. If inflation was just greedy corporations gouging their prices, why did they all of a sudden decide to do it at that moment? Why not do it years ago? And keep doing it? Reich has no answer for that. I pointed out in Reichhoff that all he was really trying to do is shift blame away from his buddies in the Democratic administration. He blamed corporations for raking in record profits when their profit rate was less than 4%, in most cases less than 2%, at a time when 12-month T-bills were bringing in 5%. These companies took a pay cut to bring you goods and services. Of course, Reich never mentioned those margins, just blew people away with big numbers without even putting them into perspective. Inflation, as any economist and macro textbook will tell you, is caused by more money chasing fewer goods and services. And there's only one driver of inflation: government. Throughout all of these videos, he blamed companies for not lowering prices after inflation went down. But inflation going down to 3% still means prices go up by 3%. The rate at which prices are rising is lower. Again, he knows this perfectly well. He also knows that government spending outpaces both revenues and GDP growth, which no corporation could do without going bankrupt. And revenue increases outpace corporate profit margins. Yet, government is never to blame somehow. And in Robert Reich is Out of Control, I showed how he was suing Elon Musk to attack free speech, calling for the arrest of people who say things his political cronies don't like. He literally said that free speech is inferior to public interest. Not according to the Constitution, it isn't. If you only get to say what the mob goes along with, it's not free speech. Shadowfoil also posted a couple of his tweets, which I can see now thanks to Elon Musk finally letting us see tweets from people who blocked us like the coward Reich is. I can't respond though, and I can't actually follow his feed, so please keep sending me the tweets and responding when you can. In one of them, Reich said, quote, "The USPS is the nation's lifeline, ensuring delivery to every corner of the country. We cannot allow it to be dismantled, sold off, and handed over to Wall Street billionaires for profit. Privatization would increase costs, reduce access, and be an utter disaster." Reich, the name of your pain is Lysander Spooner. He proved conclusively that the free market delivers the mail better and cheaper, which is why they had to respond by making it illegal to compete with the post office. Notice how he never mentions that part. And in the other one, he said, quote, "The largest donor in the 2024 election, who also happens to be the richest man in the world, tried to hijack negotiations over a spending bill and nearly pushed us to the brink of a disastrous government shutdown. Good Lord, do we need to overturn Citizens United." Well, that was all over the place. Musk exercising his freedom of speech has nothing to do with Citizens United. He gets to express his opinion on that horrible omnibus spending bill just like the rest of us. Also, what have George Soros and Michael Bloomberg been doing all these years? Or is it okay when the billionaires are on your team? Just a taste of what I was able to see in his timeline. What I always hear, we can't afford to pay our workers more than $15 an hour. What I never hear, we can't afford to pay our CEO millions of dollars a year. Funny how that works, huh? As if that was supposed to be clever or something. Ask me how I can tell he's never run a business in his life. Republicans are poised to create chaos and dysfunction as they take over Congress today. But remember, the chaos isn't happening randomly. It's part of a manufactured plot to spread cynicism and get you to check out. Don't fall for it. I feel we can expect more of that. Or a living wage, guaranteed health care, the right to join a union, the right to vote, the right to choose when, how, and with whom you start a family, the right for you and your family to live free from gun violence. These are the foundations of real freedom. And not, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, the right to bear arms, innocent until proven guilty, or any of the fascist stuff like that. How about some of America's richest individuals paid all of their Social Security taxes yesterday for the entire year? Most Americans will pay SS taxes all year long. That's because in 2025, SS taxes are only applied to the first $176,000 earned. This has put Social Security at risk. Sure, ignore the figures. Ignore what the trustees say. Ignore basic math. And that's just in one 24-hour period. Imagine that over the whole year. Who could possibly compare to Robert Reich? So yes, that convinced me. Over all of the others, Robert Reich just had to be our 2024 Idiot of the Year. Well, that wraps up the Bogosity podcast for 2024. Please go to donate.bogosity.tv for several ways to support and discord.bogosity.tv to join the discussion. Subscribe at Patreon or Subscribestar or Discord, and you can listen early and ad-free. I hope you had great holidays and a great new year, and we'll see you next week for the start of our 2025 coverage. Thank you for listening. Until next time, here's a quote from P.J. O'Rourke. It's not an endlessly expanding list of rights. The right to education, the right to health care, the right to food and housing. That's not freedom. That's dependency. Those aren't rights. Those are the rations of slavery. Hay in a barn for human cattle. The Bogosity podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License.